Right, I think we are going to get started since it's noon. I'm sure more people will be joining us later. Welcome everyone to this space. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very excited about this panel because I think it puts together a fantastic group of people and it discusses a very important topic. And as we were preparing for this meeting, Feride Kombasa actually said that this is a topic that we all can relate to. And I completely agree, right? Motherhood is something we all can relate to, not only academically, of course, but also from personal experience. So it's fantastic to have the opportunity to have this panel today. My name is Mayra Ruiz Castro, and I'm a Borderlines co-director and also senior lecturer within the School of Business and Management at Queen Mary University. The session is going to be chaired by Leslie James. Leslie, thank you so much for agreeing to chair this session. Leslie is a member of Borderlines and also reader in global history here at Queen Mary University. So I'm gonna pass it on to you, Leslie, to do your job. Thank you very much.
You verify that it's you trying to log on into.
Okay, I think someone has their sound on. I'm not sure if you can mute. I think someone appearing as Mehboob Dada. Just so you know, your sound is on. If you can mute it, that would be great. Thank you. And while that happens, I have the great pleasure of introducing our three speakers for today. What we'll do is each speaker will present various areas of their research, and we've agreed to kind of go chronologically. So we are almost taking you through a story in time. We'll begin with, therefore, Diana Kane's talk, and then Farida Kumbasar, and then Taran Kanam will speak at a very personal level as well. So we're going to kind of build chronologically and towards the personal stories, although I think this is filled with personal stories. It's again relatable in that way. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. So Dr. Farida Kumbasar is the first Borderlines resident fellow. She is a feminist migration scholar and community researcher. She completed her AHRC-funded PhD in cultural studies at the University of Roehampton. Her research investigates the intersections of migration, gender, labor, and urban change, which all tie in nicely to today's presentation. And keep your eye out. You can read all of their bios, so I'm not going to explain all the bio, except to say, keep your eye out for the forthcoming monograph, her forthcoming book, under provisional acceptance with Manchester University Press, and tentatively titled A Woman on the Move series. We also have Diana Kane, who is an independent researcher and active member of Borderlines. She's a consultant in neuropsychology and psychoanalyst, and her current work turns her kind of practitioner lens towards coloniality, focusing on settler colonial infants, excuse me, sorry, and the women enslaved or indentured who cared for them. And again, keep an eye on her forthcoming book coming out with Routledge this year, Mothering in the Colonies, as well as an article in the journal Psychoanalysis, Culture and Society on intimacies in apartheid South Africa. And last but certainly not least, we will have Taran Kanam. I realize I just introduced them slightly out of the order I just said they would speak in, so apologies. But Taran Kanam is the CEO of Brit Bangla, a forum for British Bengali professionals who are proud of their culture and heritage. She is a trustee of the Muslin Trust, which we were agreeing earlier is a very clever name, a London-based nonprofit founded to preserve, promote, and revive Bangladeshi heritage fabrics. And among her many honors, she has received the British Community Honours Award, as well as Queen's Honours for her service to diversity in government and the Bengali community. So we're really looking forward to this panel today, and I will stop talking and leave it to our expert panelists. So first, Diana.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And can I say how pleased and moved I am to be part of this panel today. It just feels like a very special opportunity to share both experience and research. My work revolves very much around images, but I'm not very experienced with teams, so I'm going to have a go now at sharing with you a PowerPoint. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
There we go. Okay, good. So the starting point for my work on this subject is this photograph in which I am the settler child in the arms of an African woman, pictured here in her role as domestic servant and nursemaid to my usurper family. We're on the lawn of the bungalow that was my home in Johannesburg under apartheid, a house which she cleaned and in which she prepared our meals and looked after me. Reviled as native, treated as an alien in the country to which she had by far the greater claim. I've no idea what was her legal status, what was her tribal heritage, whether she had the requisite papers, who were the family that she doubtless worked to support, or what were their living conditions. And my ignorance is so telling. If I learned to rely on the constancy of her presence and care, she would have been only too aware that her employment was precarious, contingent, temporary. I wonder what we were to each other, as I do about her sudden disappearance when I was 5 or 6, what family calamity or health emergency, or possibly unfounded and instantly forgotten grounds for dismissal may have led to her leaving, never to be seen, little to be spoken of again. She is central to the frame in the place of the mother. She is the axis on which the whole picture, both literally and metaphorically, relies. At the same time, her presence functions as a testament to the fantasy of a benign colonial regime and to the reality of a comfortable bourgeois life that relied entirely on her labor. She makes the picture of the cosseted settler child possible, as she made possible the pampered life of my family. But my presence there also makes her disappear as a subject. For decades, I wondered how to think and to write this relationship, contingent as it always was, also on her disappearance from my life. The omerta on this relation, the silence that followed it, made it possible to erase her from my family's history the moment she left. The ineluctable contingency of her departure, inevitable from the outset, allowed birth mothers like mine to retain in their own minds and in the discourses in which they were immersed a unique place in their child's life. That photo from my family album is but one item in a vast international archive of such images that lent themselves to misbegotten European imaginings of beneficent colonial regimes, bearing a kind of false witness to the ease of settler lives that were only enabled by the exploitation of domestic servants like the woman holding me, the vital import of whose labor to the household was inadvertently intimated in the very composition of photographs like these. The book that I'm currently writing reflects on some of these images through histories of coloniality, mothering, and race in different countries and under different regimes, to think about this relationship that was personally of such consequence, but also ubiquitous throughout the colonial world. My lodestar in this venture is the essay Black Oedipus by Rita Segato, an Argentinian anthropologist and activist who has closely examined the vital role and subsequent disappearance of the Black nanny from settler family histories and from public and academic discourses in Brazil. Her book implodes what she regards as the fantasy of the unitary figure of the mother, distinguishing between the birth mother, who she also describes as the juridical mother or mother of the law, and the mother who provides care, valorizing in this way the enslaved, indentured, or indigenous women who undertook the work of care by fully instating them as mother to the children in their charge. Upending the Freudian Oedipal triad, the term Black Oedipus radically captures the complex political and psychic relations of these two maternal figures with the, inverted commas, white child in colonial societies. This photograph is typical, captioned Ayah with child in India around 1858. The sleeping infant seems secure, enfolded in the woman's arms, but her expression is troubled. She looks into the middle distance towards what? Impossible to know, but not so hard to imagine. Is someone present there, out of frame, issuing her with instructions? Is she holding the child in the way that is expected? Is a reprimand pending if she gets it wrong or if the child stirs? Or is the mind on her own children if she has them? How would we know? Photographs like these expose the paradoxical intimacy little spoken at the heart of the colonialist enterprise. In European discourses through scientific treatises, housekeeping manuals, and medical guides, motherhood became increasingly important as it became overtly linked with the reproduction of the race and the production of citizens, an obligation to the state seen as settler women's duty and destiny. Yet coloniality also witnessed a transfer of mothering to domestic servants, the keeping of whom came to define the burgeoning settler middle class. Management of the colonial bourgeois household depended on the birth mother's confiding care of her infants to a woman who'd been colonized, at the same time negating the value of the care thus provided and of the women who provided it, women whose own family ties, endlessly disrupted, remain always a ghostly presence haunting the perimeter of European colonial histories. Following the 1857 uprising in India, the number of British settlers increased dramatically. Boosting the number of women settlers especially was deployed as a cornerstone in the effort to strengthen the divide between colonizers and colonized. The settler household became invested with political as much as domestic intent. While elsewhere settler women were recipients of endless advice produced in the metropole from medical specialists, conduct literature, childcare manuals, and women's magazines, in India, British women themselves described in journals, letters, housekeeping manuals, and memoirs the challenge of trying to recreate a familiar domestic environment, what Shashi Tharoor described in his book Inglorious Empire as the need by colonial wives to create little islands of Englishness in the unfamiliar architectural spaces and in the heat and dust of the subcontinent. At the heart of the difficulties they described lay the paradox that the task of reproducing a version of the ideal British home relied on the employment of Indian domestic servants. They wrote copiously their advice to other women, as well as their disdain and contempt for the servants they employed. Emily Short Wonnacott, wife of an army schoolmaster, documented the vexations of life in India in numerous letters home. Having experienced a, quotes, presentiment of evil, end quotes, at the prospect of going to India, she wrote in 1870 that, quotes, the natives are such a strange lot of people, dirty in the extreme and possessed of almost every bad quality, end quotes. Florence Marryat, a popular Victorian author and wife of an army officer, referred to the Indian quarter known as the Black Town of Madras as a place of offensive smells and dirt. Contempt for the physical features and bodily habits of their Indian servants extended to their moral character, to suspicion about their liability to take bribes, to their supposed tendency to cheat their employers in spite of every precaution, as Martha Sims wrote to her mother. The settler household was envisaged as a kind of frontier against India's contaminants, while British women were seen as saving India from the quotes primitive and quotes unhealthy practices of its own inhabitants. Manuals like The Complete Indian Housekeeper and Cook from British India included advice on the hiring and management of servants. They often opined that the Indian servant is a child in everything save age, an infantilization that justified policies of tutelage, supervision, and custodial control. British women were expected to train, teach, and chastise their servants in the effort to transform their behavior, attitudes, and culture in a kind of domestic imperialism. Documents like these repeatedly reproduced a plethora of negative generalizations, the risk of contagion Indian servants were deemed to pose, exposing the anxiety attendant on their necessary proximity. I've emphasized these deeply antagonistic attitudes because they formed the very contrary context in which settler families employed Indian women as ayahs, nursemaids to their children. Ayahs became crucial for the reproduction of the British imperial family. They enabled settler women to fulfill their colonial duties, freeing them to become companionate wives, to do Red Cross and other voluntary work, as well as to join tennis and cocktail parties, not to mention their pursuit of careers as writers, diarists, poets, and missionaries. The children were entrusted to the care of women whose constant proximity, not to mention whose conduct of the care itself, was held to be a threat. The intimacies in which settler children were raised were wrought in this atmosphere of contempt and menace. The relation inevitably produced a complex intermingling of affects, experience, and behaviours. If colonial domestic life was riddled with racialized boundaries, it also demonstrated their porosity. Ayahs were physically and functionally central to the household, threatening the boundary between colonizers and colonized, so carefully cultivated in other ways, while their presence in children's lives provoked anxiety about racial purity, national identity, and the risk of degeneration, as it was called. Attachments that formed in kitchens and nurseries were completely at odds with narratives that labored to render them unacceptable. Relied upon to care for, feed, and nurture settler infants, what might become of these children, nursed and nourished by so-called native women, what moral and physical contaminations might result. It was said that they transmitted unwelcome habits, traits, dogmas and expressions, religious beliefs and practices, to all of which children were considered to be especially vulnerable by virtue of their inclination to imitation. A barrage of advice for European birth mothers on how to maintain their children's estrangement from the society in which they were being raised was produced. One handbook that warned of the extremely pernicious moral influence of native nursemaids advised that children under no circumstances should be brought to bed by them and should never be permitted to sleep with them in the same room. Yet, resisting the boundary that adults were wont to draw, children did indeed imbibe and imitate habits or speech learned from those entrusted with their care, even as they copied and acquired normative European customs and conventions. Like the secret pleasure it was for me to eat with my fingers the African staple of mealie meal from a tin plate, the particular taste and smell of which I still remember, about which I never spoke. Childcare manuals may have warned of the pernicious influence of the nursemaid or ayah, but home for such children will also have been, as it was for me, the very bodies of the women who cared for them. In contrast with the provision of nurture and care by ayahs, the women who gave birth to settler children were tasked with producing the next generation of compliant British citizens and soldiers. From this perspective, the children were seen less as precious young in need of maternal love than as a national asset belonging to the empire as much as to their birth parents. From this perspective, too, children raised by ayahs were thought to be at risk of becoming unable to fulfill these important imperial roles. To mitigate that danger, settler children born in India were usually sent home to the metropole at the age at which they were thought to be most vulnerable to contamination, 5 or 6 years old. Children were surrendered, usually to the private boarding schools of the mother country, relinquishing to the state the children to whom they'd given birth. To the extent that this act of returning their children back to the imperial centre was the moment the ayah vanished from the daily life, if not the effective memory of the settler child, it was also the moment at which the birth mother made herself disappear from the child's life as a mother. This explains psychoanalyst Wilfred Bion's description of the experience of being held by his birth mother as cold and frightening, as being in the same category as sermons, the headmaster, God, please make me a good boy. He wrote that she was peculiar, that it felt queer if she picked me up and put me on her lap. And he compared with that feeling with the feeling he had for his ayah, of whom he wrote that she was a wizened little woman of whom he and his sister were both very fond, much more fond than they were of their parents. Former settlers whose early lives had been spent in India recalled with affection and nostalgia the caregivers who'd fed them, played with them, told them stories, sung them lullabies, and put them to sleep. One woman, whose ayah had been her primary carer from the time she was 7 months old, recalled the bedtime ritual they'd shared: one kiss on the cheek, one kiss on the nose, one kiss on the other cheek, a loving routine that had persisted in defiance of her birth mother's orders not to show affection to the ayah because she's a servant and an Indian. If over time she'd come to comply with that demand, all the same, she cherished into adulthood the memory of the woman who had nurtured her until she was 8, when they were abruptly separated by her return to England. It's a comparison heard again and again in writing and even in contemporary speech from people who were raised by Indian ayahs or whose parents had been, British men and women fondly recollecting childhood memories of their loving Indian ayahs, a form of nostalgia that rarely appears elsewhere in the colonial world. And I wonder whether the birth mother's surrender of her right to the child's affection made possible this overt, sentimental remembering of the ayah's love and care. Another way in which the use of domestic servants in the colonies differed in India from elsewhere was that British families returning home from India often employed ayahs to attend to the needs of the family during the long and tedious sea voyage. Between the 1890 and the 1930s, travelling ayahs, as they became known, who were brought to Britain in this way, is estimated to have numbered between 100 and 140 each year. Sometimes they accompanied their permanent employers on these trips, but more often they were hired exclusively for the journey. Little is known about these women. On ships' manifests, they might be listed with the employer family as, for instance, Mrs. Orme's ayah following Mrs. Orme's infant, or sometimes just with the employer's name, as in Ayah Smith. Although most were adults, records also showed children as young as 4 or 5 employed as travelling ayahs, perhaps as playmates for the employer's children. Their marital status is generally not known any more than is the question of whether or not they'd left behind children of their own. They may have felt some commitment to the family, but more likely it will have been an economic choice or possibly a way of escaping the burden of being a widow, a spinster, an unmarried mother, or a childless wife in a society that did not favour single women and that valorised women as childbearers, but only if married. There are at least 2 recorded cases of travelling ayahs giving birth on board ship. There are occasional references to women who made the crossing numerous times, for whom it seems to have become an occupation of choice. While the family travelled in comfort, ayahs were allocated deck-class tickets where they will have shared space with British seamen being repatriated, and with Indian male servants. Strict rules kept them segregated from their employers' quarters, except while performing their duties. So they spent their time at sea moving back and forth, incommodiously accommodated, in spite of duties that included laundry maid and caregiver to the entire family, managing seasickness and homesickness, acting as nurse, caregiver, and counsellor, in addition to their usual role as nursemaid. Increased responsibilities were reflected in better pay, but the journey was a perilous undertaking for them. In most cases, no contract of employment existed and no provision for a return passage was made, or if return were promised, that promise was often not honoured. There were no requirements on employers to provide for return and no penalty for those who failed to do so. A few travelling Ayahs found ongoing employment in Britain, but with no formal contract and with the promise of return passage broken, many were simply dismissed upon arrival, discarded, without pay, lodgings, or a way home. Missionary reports and newspapers revealed growing numbers of Ayahs residing in overcrowded, squalid boarding houses that charged rent they could ill afford. One of these houses accommodated 28 Ayahs who made their beds by tying together belongings just as they had done on ship decks. Some were forced to beg in the streets for money for a passage home. Christian charities became concerned for the welfare of abandoned Ayahs, which led to the founding of the Ayahs Home in East London, which provided accommodation for both Indian Ayahs and Amahs from elsewhere in Asia. The early history of the Ayahs Home is somewhat obscure. Most accounts suggest that it started in the 1820s when a Mr. and Mrs. Rogers first housed an abandoned Ayah at their house near Fenchurch Street. The enterprise slowly grew and saw a succession of addresses and proprietors who all referred to themselves as Mr. or Mrs. Rogers, regardless of their actual surname. In the 1890s, the home was taken over by the London City Mission, for whom it was seen in part as an opportunity to rescue heathens. It was moved more than once until on the 1st of January 1900, a new address was announced for Rogers' original Ayahs Home at 26 King Edward's Road, Hackney, where it has recently come to bear a blue plaque reading the Ayahs Home for nannies and nursemaids from Asia. There we go. From 1900, it housed between 90 and 100 women annually, offering shelter for the forlorn little brown-checked object in cold London, that's in quotes, according to the London City Mission magazine. It was positioned as a respectable and appropriate destination for these foreign servants while without employment. They were taught hymns and encouraged to attend church, as well as daily religious services that were advertised as optional but treated as mandatory. Despite its being a charitable religious institution, the home was also run as a for-profit recruiting agency, which capitalized on the demand for Ayahs by British families sailing to India. Indeed, it was advertised as a residential employment agency. Sometimes an Ayah's return ticket was traded to the home by the family who'd brought her without her knowledge or consent. The money then raised by selling the ticket to a family needing an Ayah for their voyage to India was used to pay for her board and lodgings. The Ayahs Home was thus actively involved in an international, commercial, gendered and racialized labour supply chain. The home was thoroughly colonialist, a racialized enclave in the heart of London. The Hackney and Kingsland Gazette published an article called "A Little Bit of Asia in Hackney." Contemporary discourse framed it as a surrogate family to the so-called children of empire, the superintendent and his matron wife as parental figures. Other accounts relate how the women were separated by nationality and caste in their dormitories, but spent their days together. Matron, always a Mrs. Rogers, and her successors were said to have catered to their different culinary tastes, and the home was apparently decorated in an Oriental fashion. They were viewed as vulnerable, childlike, and in need of protection, notwithstanding an average age of 35, and that in fact they were capable women entrusted with the care of the empire's infants, able successfully to negotiate the complexities and challenges of two very different worlds. This then provides a context through which to read this photograph and others like it. Whatever comfort and security the child may have felt in the arms of this woman, soon enough she will be lost to it. Yet images like this one remain a powerful and disconcerting reminder of a settler infant's first love object, the woman who provided for its every need, only to be replaced by an education and a moulding to citizenship that will have insisted on her abjection from its life. A loss utterly foreseen and prepared for by its birth mother, lest the child become too like the woman entrusted with its care. Meanwhile, the birth mother, having other matters to attend to, having her particular corner of empire to see to, having once entrusted her child to the Ayahs she will have employed for the purpose, will later, in order to protect the child from the woman's influence, have herself abandoned it to the clutches of the British public boarding school system, there to be moulded into a proper little citizen, thus enacting the juridical role of birth mother while also ceding any claim on the child's affections. The Indian Ayah and the white birth mother are thus the perfect instantiation of Rita Segato's distinction between the biological juridical mother and the mother of care, the birth mother charged with the education, moral upbringing, and the training needed to produce citizens of the state, no matter the cost to herself, the colonized mother of care, charged with meeting the child's every need, bodily and emotional, only to be discarded from its life, if not from its memory. What became of these women, their stories remain untold.
Thank you very much, Diana. Yeah, absolutely. Next, we have Faride, who will also share some slides.
Yes. Let me share. Each time I need to refresh it. Okay.
Excellent, we can see it.
Okay, hold on. I can't see it.
There you go. I think you're on slideshow. Are you where? There you go. There.
That's
No.
perfect. We can see it now.
Yeah, we can see you're in slideshow mode and we can see just your first slide. So as long as you can then, oh, I lost it.
That's the thing. I can't see it. Let me see. Let me try it again.
You were sharing it. We could see it. So if you do exactly the same.
But Faride, if where you are asked to share contact, you go to presenter mode.
Yeah.
The third one along, I think, will give you both the show and the participants.
Hold on.
There's an option to show them side by side. The participants in the slideshow.
I can't see parts. Okay, hold on.
We can see your presentation. Is it that you don't see where you are, Faride?
Hold
we
on.
can see it.
I always have this problem. Okay, let me try it again. These teams are killing me.
Just go on the share button, the up arrow.
Yeah, I do it. No,
Sorry, then share window. Don't share your screen. Maybe that will help. So if you click on share and then window.
Yeah, window, but I can't see my slides here. That's the problem. Yeah, it was here, but suddenly I lost it again. I don't.
PowerPoint open?
Maybe you need to open again PowerPoint. I mean, the
Let
whole
me-
presentation.
Let me go and open the presentation again. Okay. Now I'll do it again to see. So you see my
We see your, yep, perfect.
is it?
Yep,
Can you see it now?
yes.
Great. I'm so sorry about this. Thank you very much for this organizing this panel. I think I'm very excited to be part of this panel, and thank you for stimulating talk, Diana. I was particularly struck by the way you showed how imperial households depended on racialized women for intimate care, while simultaneously positioning them as inferior. I want to extend that conversation into a different temporal context, post-imperial Britain. My focus is on Turkish and Kurdish migrant mothers in Hackney based on my PhD research. That is, the study starting period was 1980s onward. If empire regulated racialized women's caregiving within colonial households, I ask how are migrant mothers governed within contemporary immigration and labor regimes? Thank you, Leslie, for the kind introduction. I just want to add my work in the NGO and community sector, because today's talk is not only based on my PhD research, but also what I learned when I worked with women, young refugees in their field, and when I actually developed services and managed services for mothers and children. So that is very much related to my community learning and academic learning at the same time. So for my doctoral research, I examined Turkish and Kurdish women's economic, social, and political contribution to Hackney, London Borough of Hackney. And it is an oral history project. I used participatory methods such as go-along interviews, community mapping, which is a participatory counter mapping. And I try to focus on the contributions towards the borough and how they change the space while they are themselves changing. And the Turkish-Kurdish women's migration in the 1980s was shaped by political persecution, patriarchy, and economic precarity. Many women entered informal garment making workshops immediately upon arrival. Many women I interviewed said that they started working on the next day that they arrived without speaking English, or not even having worked in factory situation before. So they worked 12 to 14-hour shift in unregulated spaces. This was not incidental, of course. Post-imperial Britain continued to rely on racialized migrant labor in informal sectors, reproducing colonial hierarchies of mobility and work. And mobility remained conditional labor precarious. So it is very much the legacy of the colonial history. The industry operated, the garment making industry operated through subcontracting chains that outsourced to actual production to small workshops. And that allowed many minority men from Turkish Kurdish communities and other communities as well to own workshops. And many of these women, when they started working in garment making factories, those factories are owned by Turkish speaking men or families. So this system of outsourcing the production and allowing small workshops to take those roles not only enabled male members of the community to become owner of those workshops, but also facilitate the women, mobilize the women in their own communities to become workers and exploited within the community. So because the sewing culturally associated with women's domestic labor, it is made women easier to be recruited. Many women became lead migrants because of that. They arrived first, working intensively to support families back home or save for family reunification. Many left their children, young children, behind, expecting a temporary separation. However, during those time, and I think it is the same, even more difficult now, it took about 7-8 years, sometimes more than a decade, to reunite with children. That prolonged separation is central to what I want to discuss today. When garment production later moved abroad, women's labor did not disappear. It became unpaid within the family businesses. Their investments, their savings are actually invested in Hackney, turned into cafes, restaurants. So much of the food scenery is dominated by Turkish Kurdish communities because of this. And those women whose investment actually created that scenery, they lost their status as workers and they became invisible helpers to those family businesses. Gradually, they were pushed back home as full-time homemakers. This return was not natural, it was structured. Before I want to focus on the motherhood, I just want to talk about the theoretical framework behind of my analysis. So the motherhood is not natural, it is regulated. And drawing on Adrian Rich, I distinguish between mothering as lived care and motherhood as an institution that defines norms. I mean, Diana is already elegantly explored that. Migrant mothers are positioned as reproducers of the nation. And we heard that the settler mothers are actually given that role as well. They are expected, migrant mothers are expected to preserve culture while producing successful integrated citizens. And these two positions often contradictory positions. And the other theoretical framework which is useful is the transnational mothering, which helps us understand care across borders. It explains the distance mothering. it is generally what the migrant mothers do. They continue care through financial support, remittances, they send back presents. They try to continue emotionally support their children as much as they can do. But during 80s and 90s, we didn't have internet, we didn't have FaceTime, we didn't have WhatsApp, we didn't have smart technology. So the communication was not like daily communication with their children. And most of the mothers didn't have and at that time, they didn't have telephone, baseline telephone at their homes because they were living in temporary accommodations. Many were living in squats or shared accommodations. So it made very difficult for them to continue communicate. And most of the time, this communication was once in a week telephone conversation, while from the public phone box, while someone actually pushing 50p's, that was the maximum you could put, 50p's, while the other person tried to make a phone call. So in this situation, that temporary separation prolonged by the asylum bureaucracy. And the transnational mothering theory doesn't actually capture this prolonged state-imposed delay. And the fourth theoretical framework I want to mention is the governmentality, which help us to see how power operates, not only through the policy, but also shaping norms, the state structures, conditions, and when consequences emerge, they are interpreted as maternal shortcomings. What I add is this sequence is that structurally produced separation followed by feminized blame. I want to share a story here. Berna, she's not in the picture. Berna is an anonymized name. It is random picture given by one of the women I interviewed. So Berna arrived in London 1988 with her eldest son. She left two younger children behind after her husband, a Kurdish activist, was killed. She feared traveling with all three children. When she arrived in London, she immediately began working at the textile factory, started sending money, presents for her children. She worked really hard, long hours. Her aim was simple: stabilize her asylum status and reunite with her younger children. Most of the asylum-seeking women who arrived at that time, they left their children behind. One of the women, for example, told me that we just followed the steps of the woman who did migrate before us. In 60s and 70s, the woman who migrated from her region to Germany as worker, they left their children behind. So she said, we didn't know any other way, and we didn't know what is expecting us, and it was the logical thing to do. So they expected this separation being very temporary, but instead reunification took like 7-8 years, sometimes more than a decade. And children left behind couldn't understand why they couldn't join their mothers. Mothers could not explain why asylum, not explain the asylum bureaucracy. When reunion happened for many, many years later, it was often awkward. I used to work with young refugees in Hackney in a research project called Hear Our Voice. And many of the young refugees interviewed at that time told me that they experienced this separation. And some young people even said they couldn't recognize their mother at the airport. So in that context, we are talking about how state produced temporal separation and how children and mother impacted by that separation. And generally, the mother absorbed the blame because she left the children behind. The second form of separation was produced through labor. Even when children arrived with their mothers or were united later, separation did not end. It continued through exploitive working conditions. As I said, textile workshops required like 12 to 14-hour shifts in informal conditions. One of the second generation women told me that her mother was actually looking after other families' children, other workers' children, along with her. And she said she actually felt she felt that she was sidelined. And another second generation woman told me that, for example, she and her sister would go to school while her mom was going go to factory. Then from school, they directly go to the factory where their mother worked. And she said, we played between the machines. And she also remembered that on Saturdays, there were even more children were playing between the machines. And she nicely put it, as I am quoting, the factory became a playground for them. So this image complicates the idea of maternal absence. These children were not abandoned. They were folded into labor regime. So production and reproduction collapsed into the same space, which is in the factory. Later, when youth crisis discourse emerged, mothers' long working hours were cited as evidence of neglect. The exploitative labor regime disappeared from the explanation. Instead, the focus shifted to absent mothers. Once again, the structural exploitation was reframed as mother's failure. And at that time, and even at present, there was no accessible childcare for migrant factory workers. So women did what a woman often do under structural neglect. They organized. In 1985, Mini Kurdish nursery was founded by a group of women from the community to support textile workers' children. Community organizations started getting funding to provide after-school clubs, holiday schemes, generally in unsuitable conditions. Informal nanny networks also emerged. Some women who could not access factory work because they had young children or for other reasons, they started to become as childminders, looking after the others' children. The kinship networks expanded, care circulated within the community. But as I said, one second generation woman whose mother was actually minding others' children along with her said, I had to share my mom with others. So as feminists, what we see as a solidarity among women coming together and you know, circulating the care among them, supporting each other, is felt as emotional scarcity by these children. This is crucial because the lack of childcare infrastructure was a structural issue, yet the consequences were experienced intimately. Children felt divided attention. Mothers felt guilt. The lack of childcare was structural neglect, but its consequences were personalized, responsibility feminized, mothers again absorbed the blame. Um, did I? Sorry. Okay. I just want to talk about racialized governmentality of motherhood. I think it is important. But before then, I just want to discuss the how structural issues turned into mothers' blame. In the 1990s and 2000s, youth crisis discourse intensified. Gangs, addiction, suicide, both in the public records, like local authority papers, local newspapers, and community papers, constantly reported increased Turkish Kurdish youth gang activity, lower school achievement, and increased suicide rate. There was even a board was set up during that time, suicide monitoring board, which included representatives of Turkish Kurdish communities, NHS, public health, local authorities, social services, to actually come together to think through how they can prevent those suicides. The dominant question again in those reports became, where was the mother? So factory work became evidence of neglect. Government-funded parenting programs increasingly targeted women during that time, teaching them ideal mothering. One of the participants that I interviewed for my PhD, whose son later took his own life, repeatedly questioned her own mothering during the interview. She did not begin by questioning the system. She asked whether she had failed him, whether she couldn't understand him properly, couldn't support him properly. So structural separation became intimate guilt. The crisis was social, but the blame was feminized, and mothers internalized it. So in terms of the, now I want to focus more precisely on racialized governmentality of motherhood. I think it is the most important part. Governmentality, as Foucault explains, is not only about direct control. It is about producing norms, shaping what is considered responsible, moral, and acceptable behavior. But these norms are not neutral. They are racialized. The figure of the good mother in Britain is historically shaped by white middle class expectations. So constant presence, emotional availability, educational support, linguistic competency, and cultural alignment with national values. Migrant mothers are measured against that norm, and failure to meet this norm is read as cultural deficiency. This is where racialization enters. The scrutiny applied to migrant mothers is more intense. Their parenting is more easily framed as problematic. Their labor is more easily interpreted as neglect. Welfare systems, schools, and immigration regimes all participate in this regulation, not through explicit accusation, but through subtle categorization. So, troubled families, at-risk families, vulnerable communities, hard-to-reach parents, all these vocabularies came into our narratives because our daily language, because of this subtle governance. And these labels produce difference. And power operates through this comparison. Who is troubled families and who is not troubled families? It produces a hierarchy of motherhood. Some mothers are assumed competent, others must constantly prove themselves. In this framework, migrant mother is governed not only through border control, but through moral expectation. And when youth struggle, the question is not what structural conditions shape this outcome, but why did the mother fail? And that shift from structural accountability to racialized moral evaluation is actually central to my argument today. And I want to conclude by returning to broader frame. The dynamics I have described are not isolated to one community or one historical moment. Under empire, mobility was regulated, labor was extractable, and racialized women were positioned as reproducers of moral and social order while being denied full political belonging. In contemporary Britain, the structures are different, but the governing logic persists. Immigration regimes delay family reunification and produce prolonged separation. Informal and precarious labor markets extract time while offering the little protection. And childcare remains unevenly accessible. And when young people struggle, responsibility narrows to the mother. What we see is not simply cultural conflict or parental absence. We see structurally produced separation followed by feminized blame. Racialized governmentality operates by shaping the norms of the good mother and measuring migrant mother against them, while obscuring the structural conditions that constrain them. If we shift our lens from maternal failure to governance, we begin to see migrant motherhood not as deficient, but as politically regulated at the intersection of border control, labor extraction, and racialized belonging. So that shift is necessary if we are moved to if we are to move from moral judgment to structural accountability. As final sentence, I can say migrant motherhood is not deficient, but regulated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faride, for both, moving stories and a powerful analysis of what's happening in this moment. I'll invite Tara now to say some words about your experience.
Thank you, Faride. That I could really relate to some of those insights about migrant women working so hard. My mother also used to work in East London in Toynbee Hall, the Aldgate, and in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we had a deluge of migrant women who were also separated from their husbands for a long time. So when they did arrive, they were not living in a very nice condition. They had children, language barrier, working, sewing, actually, cheap labor, as you mentioned, that was taking place. But every penny counted for them. It's putting food on the table and providing clothes for their children. So there were that juggling, being a mum, but also working at home. They would work late night. They used to do these lining for jackets, maybe 5 pence per lining. It was very cheap labor, but they did it because it was just they wanted to provide for their families. So they had language barrier, but they could sew. So I could really relate to that. But also some of the issues you touched on about the generational, the youth crisis. In the 70s, the children that were brought up, they saw their mothers struggling. They had a different outlook, different problems. They were very strong. They might not have had that motherly love as such because the mother was so busy working, feeding. They didn't have that time when they came from school with their mother to be engaged. But the problems the children that had from the 70s is different from the 80s and 90s. So from the children that were born from migrant women, they had more of a crisis, like drugs issues, gangs in the 90s, because I remember all of that. I lived in Stepney Green, so I know all of that happened. But my mother, I used to go with my mum to all of these migrant women's homes, and they used to have these sewing machines, and it was quite fascinating how they would be working. And it was my mother used to work at Toynbee Hall, so sending those children to the language classes was a bit of a relief for the women as well, bit of that 2 hours after school going to Toynbee Hall to learn Bengali language. And they would also get a bit of a biscuit and a drink, which is quite nice for the children as well in Toynbee Hall. But that provided that breathing space for the mum and to catch up on their sewing or whatever they needed to do. So that juggling effect that migrant mothers have, they did all of that. But we as a community, we tend to forget about the women putting so much effort, struggle and sacrifices that is not actually recognized. And I think it's so important, just like reflecting back on the Ayahs, the women that came 200-300 years ago on ships. They were almost like pioneers, adventurers, you know. I think there was very strong women. They were not just feeble ladies, or let's just get on the ship and come to England and work for, you know, British families. They made a strong decision to take that a journey forward, and to sleep on those decks like, you know, third class people, not with the British family, or would stay in the little blanket outside the door of that British family that took them to ship. They went through that struggles, and then they would be destitute in England, you know, no return fare. So we have to look at the strength of these women as well. As a kind of a parallel, the sacrifices they did as the mothers, they could have been widows or children back home in India, parallel to, you know, the migrant women of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. They wanted to be good mothers, provide for their children. So, and I think they are the invisible women that contributed so much, but we don't recognize that, but they also get the blame. So I can see a lot of that parallel. If they're not good mothers, they have to teach their children their culture. Some of the values about family values were very strong in the Bangladeshi community, any South Asian community was very strong having that. But what strength I can also relate to is having that network. Bangladeshi women, South Asian women, they didn't have internet, maybe phones, they couldn't afford that time. You know, in the ancient times, they could communicate. They had hubs of women. They would help and support each other. If someone was short of food, they would send some food over. If someone couldn't collect their children, they would ask another family member to go and collect their children. So they would huddle together. They found ways to support each other. And that's also not often talked about. How did they survive these crowded situations and trying to be a good mum, providing for their children? So I think there's a lot of strength that we miss out talking about these migrant mums from all cultures I'm talking about now as well. And they, like the Bangladeshi women, they didn't work in factories because of the cultural barriers of the men, but they worked at home. And there's actually a research done by Brick Lane Circle, a free book you can get about the sewing ladies. And I met some of these girls, their mothers used to sew and sew and sew. And they had these brother machines, and then some still have them because it's historically remembering their mothers, their hard work, sacrifices they did. So I think I can see a lot of the parallels, but I think just like the Ayahs, we need to remember the migrant mothers' contributions. The invisible stories that we must always talk about.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, do you want to keep going?
Yeah, so just like my mother, she worked in Toynbee Hall, and there's also this bias about women's stories being forgotten. And I think we need to voice up from the Asian community, South Asian community, and talk about our women that did so much. Maybe our ancestors were Ayahs. We need to look into that. We don't know who these Ayah women names were. Sometimes they would arrive, they would be like assets, like in South Africa, in the 300 years ago, they were part of a household, but they were listed an asset. But at least there was a name attached to it, like something Bengala or something like slaves of Bengala. But we don't recognize the Ayah's name. And I tried to research as well, like where were they buried? Where's the registration of list of these names? But surely sometimes I think those British families, those aristocratic families, very rich families that from rags to riches who made money in India, brought these ladies, surely they must have some photo, some name, some region. So I feel a bit astonished, if I can say that there is no access to any knowledge on that about Ayahs, the identities, and that's the missing issue about Ayahs. Nobody knows who they are. Occasionally you can see some are buried Ayah to this family or the list of the family name, like St. Marylebone Church or something, and they would mention some burial site of an Ayah, but it's just a missing black hole that needs to be seen. So having that blue plaque in Hackney, in King Edward Street, is a big achievement. And I actually went to that launch in 2022, and I felt quite happy about it, but also very sad listening that all these thousands of women that came, not just 100 years ago, even this century, 1930s, 40s, who are these women? There's no recognition. But however, I could say, like, being Asian, I used to work in Department of Health, and I was doing one project, and there was this doctor, Dr. Ian Gillespie, who used to be always quite friendly towards me, and I didn't understand. But anyway, we were working on the same project, and eventually one day he came over with this cup of tea, and then the truth came out. He had a nursemaid, a nanny from South Asia. I didn't quite that time understand the Ayah stories in those days, but and that was the endearment, the attachment he felt. He said we used to have a nanny from India, I think, and she passed away, and we used to love this nanny. And now I wish I could find this Dr. Gillespie and find out who this nanny was, because she obviously had a name. So I know if we try, we can find these nannies, Ayahs names. So I think we should really commemorate some of these Ayahs, actually. And that's something I would love for this to happen. Any thoughts from anyone?
Yeah, thank you. That's wonderful. And absolutely, you're not, I mean, names and story, like the humanity of people, right, is something that has come out in each one of your talks, right? Is the attention to the person that is so important. We have 15 minutes. I will look at the chat and monitor the chat. I would like to invite anyone in the audience to let me know in the chat that you'd like to ask a question. You can put the question in the chat as well if you are having any trouble. I think what I'll do for the sake of time is collect a few. While I'm collecting a few questions, we thought we would invite the panel themselves to see if Taran has responded a little bit, and I just wanted to invite Diana and Faride if you have any comments or questions on each other's presentations while we collect from the audience. We'll start with Diana. Do you have anything that you wanted to comment on? Oh, you're
I
unmuted.
can't hear.
Yeah, there we go.
Am I on?
There we go.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, I just want to say it's when I embarked on this project some few years ago now, it was was beyond imagining that I might be part of a panel like this one today. I'm just so thrilled that my work I feel like it's found a place in a very important history, and I really want to thank all of you for making that possible. It's a very amazing experience, I have to say. My head is full of things, but one of them is Farida thinking about the idea of the good mother against which migrant mothering has been so abjectly measured, perhaps through the 20th century until now. I mean, I don't know that it was the case so much before, but definitely with 20th century theorizing about the good mother, for example, Freud's eliminating of the figure of the Kinderfrau and the nanny from any of his theorizing, and bringing that loving figure into sort of a melding with the birth mother in a kind of a magician's act that often is forgotten. I'm just reflecting on what you're saying about the good mother as the kind of value against which migrant women as mothers have been negatively judged. I'm also thinking about the way in which the very idea of the good mother, somehow so much an idea identified with the imperial family in my mind. It's such a malign notion, because always, everywhere, it's relied on somebody else doing the work of actually providing the care. And I wonder what you think about that.
I totally agree, and that good mother ideal, as you said, it is changing, and it depends on the context. After 9/11, for example, the Muslim mothers are targeted specifically within the migrant communities. And the ideal mother is presented who is Christian, who is fluent in English, fluent in education. So it depends on the political conjuncture, and in terms of racialization of the care work is it also continued through neoliberalism as well. It is perfectly fit into the neoliberalism. Therefore, colonial logic persisted and built through neoliberal policies, and that is easily being done. I don't know whether it is answered your question. Okay, and my question to you is very interesting, is to see I heard about Ayahs before, and it especially one of the story published in the Hackney history book about an Ayah being deprived as soon as the sea journey finished. And it really struck me, her journey. But when I heard your talk today, is really what else, another thing struck me is that how actually settler families, seeing themselves as imperial subjects, justify entrusting their children to these racially inferior, culturally backward carers. How do they justify to themselves?
It's, it is the question of coloniality and mothering. I mean, it's completely remarkable, and the sort of, in a way, the lengths to which they went to disparage the racialized mothers of care to whom they entrusted their beloved children. It's absolutely shocking, actually. I mean, it's like the cognitive dissonance of it is almost unimaginable, really.
Yeah.
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 I'm actually on a site because my family are from Assam originally, and there are a lot of British people that live there, and I'm trying to connect and look into my grandfather's history. Anyway, and they have a lot of British people that are reconnecting with, they're submitting pictures of their ayahs, they want to meet and they reunite with their ayahs' children that cared for them, that affection they had, some fun memories. So even the British mothers tried to separate them. That affection and love was always there. And it's fascinating what you've just said is actually there. You cannot move that, shift that as much as the British way of training them to keep the racialized mothers separate. It just doesn't work. Emotions will always be there because we're human.
Exactly.
It strikes me that from all of your presentations, but particularly bring it out that like the border of this, the title of this talk is functioning in several ways, right? There's the migrant border, but then there's also this border that's constantly being crossed between carers that are and like, well, we're supposed to be on this line, but we have to, we're constantly crossing that border of emotion, relation, caring, in those relationships and in those contexts. We have a question from the chat, and I should also say, actually, Tara, in your last comment, I have a student. She's just finishing her undergrad dissertation, but in the summer I did a project with some students where we went to the Bodleian archives on another matter. But this one student really wanted to do Ayahs, and she found an archive of photographs from Assam, I'm pretty sure, of it's like somebody has deposited their imperial archive, but there's photo albums, and this student worked with the images and of Ayahs. So we have a question in the chat from Chaitanya. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Thank you for the insightful presentations. Although digital communication technologies facilitate transnational mothering, do you think, in a way, the technology is again reinforcing social and cultural expectations?
Shall I go for it?
Sure.
I think this digital platforms or digital technologies is reproducing the same, they are part of the same narrative, same ideological structure. Therefore, I totally agree with the comment that social and cultural expectations are reframed through these digital technologies, but following the same logic of colonial, imperial, and neoliberal ideologies. Yeah.
Any other responses to that question from Taran or Diana? Diana, sorry.
Diana, do you want to add anything here?
No, I don't think so. I entirely agree with that. I mean, what is really surprising in a way, although, you know, obviously not really surprising, is that, you know, as this plays out over time, you know, through coloniality in the 19th century to the migration of women from the colonized world to the old world, inverted commas, to take up the role of the child care bearer through the digital world. You know, I think precisely as Farida says, what is really surprising is that although the context changes, actually something absolutely essential about the dynamic remains precisely distressingly the same, actually.
Yeah.
I agree. And then just from the Bangladeshi perspective, young mothers, the mothers of children of migrant mothers historically, I think it's evolved. I think there was one time where migrant mothers were expected to work, to contribute when their husbands were struggling in the 70s. But soon as things settled, they were back into the cultural expectation, mothers should stay at home and all of that. But now moved to here, now you see the same on social media. You see a lot of cooking, women juggling motherhood and doing cooking. And sometimes you get abuse online, these women. How are you cooking this for your children? That doesn't look healthy. So this is the modern version of demeaning the mothers. Well, they're cooking, they're working. They're trying to bring up their children. So you can never, please anyone. So women are now juggling. They're still working multi jobs as well. Not just motherhood is quite tough, but they're trying to earn their money. They would do traditional foods, selling, making. So I can still see the parallels of the past migrant women to now. They're doing handmade cooking, handmade foods, or not sewing. No one can sew anymore, modern times. But they're still doing something creative and also linked to a little bit to their culture, which is I'm happy to see. Cultural cooking, even though it's evolved, it's not the traditional cooking. We've evolved, but it's nice to see that. But I think there's still pressure on mothers, the cultural expectations in modern times.
So thank you very much. I think that question was actually perfect might be the wrong word, but it brings us precisely to why all of your work and all of the research that we've heard today is so important to keep sharing and to keep getting out there, because the narrative remains the same. It's just being reproduced on new platforms.
Yeah.
So the more that we can share these stories and understand the nature of and then therefore kind of challenge where those narratives are constructing real problems, and not the fake problems of like, oh, it's all the mother's fault for neglecting. So thank you very much. And thank you for that question, which so poignantly brought us to the present. So thank you, Myra and Fatima, for organizing this panel. Myra, do you want to say a few words just to point us to the next event?
Yes, thank you so much, Leslie. I just want to say, I believe someone is trying to say something. Is that true? Is it? Yes, I think it's, I can't see your full name. I'm so sorry.
Chaitanya.
Oh, and
sorry.
so it's two more points.
How am I missing this? Sorry.
No, it's
I don't
impossible
see
to
it
see
either.
everyone. If people are happy to stay 2 more minutes to listen to our colleagues' comments, contributions, Meg, feel free to unmute yourself. And
sorry, am I audible?
Oh, Chaitanya is audible, but I think Meg is also trying to say something. If you just unmute, Or Chatania, you are there. Why don't you go first then?
Okay, thank you so much. So it's a very interesting presentation. So my research is also focusing on transnational mothering experiences of migrated nurses from Kerala, India. So I'm working on nurses who migrated to the Gulf countries without their children. So during my field work and analyzing my data, this part was very interesting. They all are using digital communication platforms for, enact care from a distance. But at the same time, these children are expecting. Their children and their parents, the caretakers of the children are expecting a lot from the mother, that they are supposed to take the phone calls even they are at work, and they have to find time to call their children without disturbing their sleep time or school time or whatever. So it seems that they all understood that this communication technologies are actually a better way to communicate with their children, but at the same time, the expectations of performing their mothering is it's actually increasing, that they have to be available since they have a mobile phone, smartphone and internet connection. I just want to add that this is a very fascinating session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry to be late. But thank you to all the three speakers for your talk. And Diana, it's always really lovely to hear what you have to say. There are some interesting thoughts really about how little we learn from history and how history continues to repeat itself so significantly in the here and now. And I guess they're more points of reference really for me and my own personal reflection around how in the present here and now, Caribbean women are victimized, Caribbean mothers are victimized and are blamed for not being able to, their maternal pregnancies. There are significant issues there around the lack of care that they're receiving and the racism that they're experiencing. And yet it subconsciously is probably blamed left, right, and center onto their parenting, lack of parenting responsibilities. So that was the thought that came up. But the other thing that really came up, Diana, from your talk was really a reference around how, we know so little about the histories of these Asian women that came here to this country. Absolutely very little. And before I forget my thought, Tarin, perhaps there's an interesting reflection on Anglo-Indians in India that you might want to look into, for example, as a frame of reference to look at the role of names that perhaps you're searching for Ayahs that might well have come here or have gone there, for example, for different reasons. There's a lot there that's been written about. But Diana, really, it reminds me of a play I went to see in the East End, probably with you. It was all centered around jihadi brides. Yeah. And they were Muslim. And Frida, thank you for raising the word Islam and Muslims here, because again, that's another area that's often erased in terms of our discussion around mothers and families and how we locate ourselves in communities that exist in London and that are traumatized purely on the basis of their religion. Anyway, I digress. But that particular play flagged up significantly really around how we in the here and now blame the kind of export of Muslim women to these countries at the end of the day, and we forget that history around how lovely British women were sent to India, for example, to retain a cultural, racial identity at the end of the day, and to preserve that purity of the lovely British soldier that went out there to protect this nation. So I think we need to. It's a really interesting point of reflection that all three of you present around history that existed and history that exists now and how it's playing itself out. Sorry, I kind of talk too much. Anyway, I just thought I'd flag that up because it was something that just listening to all three of you that came up for me, and I thought I'd flag it up.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matt. I completely agree. I think the three presentations put together was a fantastic, beautiful way of, explaining all the points so clearly and illustrated them with so much detail. Thank you so much. This has been genuinely a fantastic session. And just to close, because I think this community, this group here would be interested perhaps to know about our upcoming events. And I'm going to very quickly share here the upcoming events. So we have in the end of March a session with Diana, right? She spoke about the book she's writing, working on now. And she's inviting us to have a reflective session with her where she's going to share about her settler colonial experience with settler colonial childhood. And it's a very candid, intimate session. So you all are welcome to join us. We are going to circulate an invitation soon. And then it all ties up nicely together. Farida is going to organize a walk in Hackney. So she's going to take us to those important sites, right? Perhaps we can actually go to the Ayahs house. We can add that point perhaps in the walk. And again, you all are invited to join us. You will receive very soon more details about these two events. And with that, I thank you, Leslie, thank you so much for the wonderful sharing work. To the three speakers, again, thank you very much, our participants, and we'll make sure we share we share the recorded video through our usual channels so that people who couldn't attend still can listen to this presentation. Thank you very much, everyone.
Can I, sorry to jump in, can I do a quick promo? I've just put a link in the chat. We have given the history point, we have a visiting fellow, Professor Devarian Baldwin, who's coming from the US in the month of March. He's a historian like myself, and he's going to be doing a public lecture at the end of his time with us called Deploying History for Change, and working with history and how history can shape advocacy and public policy. And I just wanted to invite everyone to that if you're able to make it.
Wonderful. We'll forward the invitation to the Borderlines community. Yeah, is that all right? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Myra.
Thank you. Bye.